that the city and the chapter have put into this issue. Oh no, what's going on here? The idea of ecosystem restoration as a scientific discipline is fairly new. It's been around a few decades, but in recent years, it's become clear that like climate change, this is an urgent issue, and everywhere from global communities like the United Nations to local communities like the Yerba Buena CNPS are realizing the importance of this. So there are a number of programs out of the United Nations Environmental Program and even the World Health Organization that emphasize the importance of native plant restoration. In California, I think one of the leading natural resource restorationists are River Partners, which began in Chico, California, and is now throughout the state. And in terms of cities, from what I can tell, I think San Francisco is way ahead of the curve. So you guys are doing many kinds of activities, recognizing the need for benefits of biodiversity to nature and people, to reduce further degradation, and so on. And lots of policy integration. I think that's something we need to work on both at the local and state level, both at the local and state levels, and also monitoring and management. But basically what it comes down to at any scale, whether we're talking about your front yard or hundreds of thousands of acres, we are talking about the application of basic ecological principles. So the healthiest situation is to have a large metapopulation that is continuous, where there's high connectivity among all the subpopulations. And as we go from left to right, we can see that they become increasingly less desirable. And we need to have patches where we can see the movement. If we can't have continuous movement of organisms among patchy habitats, we can have large habitats with patches surrounding them, which is okay. And given a built environment, we have to do the best we can, which is to work with the patches that we're given. And in some cases, we have to build new patches, which it seems to be what San Francisco is doing. And the non-equilibrium would be just no regard to this whatsoever, and just maybe there's a patch here and there. Regardless, even if there is no connectivity, I want to emphasize that even the smallest restoration patch has turned out to be an important source of hosting biodiversity. So as you know, as I saw just on the introductory slides for tonight, California Floristic Province is one of the 36 global hotspots of biodiversity on the planet, which means that these areas, in terms of land area, are less than 5% of the land area of the planet, yet contain most of the biological diversity on the planet. In California, and particularly the Central Coast, which includes San Francisco, is really important in this area. And as you also know, and if you look at the latitudes of these areas, they're both around the equator and at the Mediterranean latitudes of about 30 degrees north and south, that these are areas where people like to live. So there is a lot of development pressure in these areas. So as humans, it's our responsibility to reduce our impact as much as possible. This is a picture from Hidden Nature, which I'll talk more about in a second. I just want to say I was just blown away by how great this project is. This is, of course, San Francisco as it looks today. And this is this project that was done through Hidden Nature as in concert with the San Francisco Estuary Institute, as near as I can tell. And this is just, I want to see this done for the whole state. This is so perfect. I can't even imagine what would happen for the Central Valley, which of course has been almost completely transformed, 99% of it. But this is based on soil surveys, historical photographs, historical accounts, anything from pre-colonization to the early colonists and their descriptions of the accounts of what San Francisco looked like. And as you can see, a lot of it here shown in this light beige was active sand dunes. And then in this darker beige, which is these more stable sand dunes, which would have hosted coastal sage scrub and chaparral. But there are a number of other really important areas, of course, because of its location in the bay and on the Pacific Ocean, a lot of wetland environments, rivers that are now been either channelized or underground and no longer contain corridors of riparian habitat. I'm sure a lot of these serpentine areas shown here as the speckled areas have been developed. These green areas would be coastal live oak woodlands, which would pretty much, as far as I can tell, been the primary tree cover, if not pretty much the only tree cover on the peninsula. So it was mostly shrubs and sand dunes, and with some really specialized habitats mixed in, the serpentinite vegetation, the estuaries, and I think I even heard tell of a little fen down here in the south end of the city, which is very exciting. So not a lot of treed habitat in the pre-colonial San Francisco, but as near as I can tell, Sean Baumgarten, if I have his name correct, is one of the ones leading this project. And there are a number of other people whose names I don't have off the top of my head. Peter Brastow with the city seems to be involved in this also. And it's just, again, I just can't say how wonderful of a project this is. And here's some pictures that they may have used in this project that I found on the web. This is out in the Richmond district, about 1890. You can see the cliff house way out here, the pre-fire version of the cliff house. And here is 31st and Geary. Looks a little bit different now, doesn't it? In 1900. And this is the Bayshore at Potrero Hill, again, looking quite a bit different than it does today. And this is in 1860. So a busy time since the gold rush would have begun by this time. And here we have a view looking towards Mission Dolores around 1860. And just note again that although grazing probably was almost definitely present by 1860, not a lot of treed habitat shown in this picture. There are globally a lot of cities that are doing what San Francisco is doing. I'm currently in Scotland, so I'm interested in a lot of their environmental initiatives, and they are doing a lot of urban renewal, biodiversity renewal, I should say, not urban renewal in the traditional sense, through this. And I'm including these links. They don't work, by the way. You'll have to copy them and put them in your browser. And lots of really interesting examples here. One of my favorite examples, just because I didn't expect it. In the past few years, I had the opportunity to travel to Chicago a fair amount. And the Chicago Botanic Garden, which is a research institute and collaborates with a lot of the universities in the Chicago area and the city of Chicago, and a lot of prairie restorationists have put forth a lot of programs to rewild Chicago. So you can even in downtown Chicago, it's amazing. There are restored prairies everywhere you go. It's really cool. It's in bits and pieces, and like San Francisco, they're restoring the lakeside wetland areas. But it's really wonderful. And I don't know why I wouldn't have expected it to be Chicago, but I didn't, and it's wonderful. Washington, D.C. is another leader in this area. They have the advantage of having so many natural parks in the region. So a lot of horticultural examples. The National Botanic Garden is there, which is very manicured and perfect, but they also are doing a lot of biodiversity initiatives in this area. And this last one is a global initiative, and it has, again, basically a blueprint for success, a step-by-step program, which, again, San Francisco appears to be doing most, if not all of this, and it provides an outline and a blueprint for success for these restoration programs. Why do we care about biodiversity in urban areas? We're doing all this restoration, as I said, out in the valley, on the Delta, which, oh boy, needs a lot of work, and on the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River. Why do we need biodiversity in urban areas? San Francisco Bay Area is blessed with a lot of natural areas and open space, and combined with pretty wonderful weather. We do have probably more urbanization or exposure to nature in our urban areas than other urban areas. But one thing we know is that the more we urbanize, the less interaction there is with nature. I taught at Fresno State for a few years, and I was amazed at the number of students who had never been to Yosemite, which was an hour away. And I think there are a number of factors that go into that, but in general, living in a dense urban environment will reduce our interaction with nature. And we gain so much benefit from interacting with nature in terms of walking. I don't know about you, but I like walking in nice parks with a lot of native wildlife and habitat. If you've raised children, or you're around children, or you teach children, you know that interaction with nature is critical to their cognitive development. Nature has been repeatedly shown to improve the mental health of citizens. And these two things have to do with just reducing the heat island effect that so much concrete and asphalt lead to heat reflection into the city. And by having natural areas, this is reducing that heat island effect, which provides energy savings and will reduce climate change. And of course, trees and plants in general, of course, provide a source to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Other benefits of native plants of particular importance right now is water conservation. I don't know what the water situation is in San Francisco. Chico is where I live, is in a world of hurt. Wells all around Butte County and the surrounding counties are starting to go dry as agriculture, big ag, is pumping down the water table. Low maintenance, it depends. I'm finding that having a fairly good sized native plant garden actually takes a fair amount of maintenance, although I don't certainly go out and have to mow the lawn weekly. It's a fair amount of weeding, but I also use it as a form of exercise, and I enjoy it. I'll cite a few studies, and there have been a number of studies cited. I noticed that Susan on her sites, her talks for the San Francisco Library, talk about Robin Thorpe, a retired professor from UC Davis. And he's really talked about the importance of native plants for insect and bird habitat. Doug Talmy from the back east, and it's one of those small states. I always get them mixed up with the Rhode Island or Delaware. He has done a number of studies. One really influential study that I'll cite in a minute in 2018, emphasizing the importance of native plants to insect diversity, which in turn provides bird habitat. And obviously, I never use pesticides or fertilizer on my native plants, and I don't use water once they're established. So it's healthier for people and the local environment. Things are bad in terms of biodiversity globally. They say one of the important measures, and I've noticed this when you're driving through the valley or anywhere really at dusk. I don't know about you, but I remember you just be blinded, your windshield, by all the insects. That really doesn't happen that much anymore. And that's because insects are in decline. We don't really know how many insect species are native to California. Estimates vary wildly, anywhere between 50 to 100,000. But the decline is estimated to be up to 40%, and that is huge. And this includes critically endangered and threatened species. The same with native plant species, anywhere from things that are on the verge of extinction to things that are maybe mildly threatened. About 40% of our native plant species are estimated to be threatened with extinction. This is the Narango study. This is out of the Talmy lab. And this study has really made a big splash in the 4 years that it's been out, where he did a comparison of non-native trees and native trees in a native garden versus a manicured garden, and found that any amount of native plants help in terms of insect diversity. But if you have at least 70% of the plants native, you're going to have much higher densities of moths and butterflies in the order Lepidoptera. And this is really important for nesting small birds. And in this case, Carolina chickadees, but in California would be our native birds also. Another study was done a little earlier in a very different environment in Phoenix, that desert trees that are neighborhoods that have desert trees maintain much higher native bird richness than neighborhoods without native trees. So here we have native bird richness at this end with no native trees, and then it increases as we increase the number of native tree species. Here's another study. There aren't that many studies, surprisingly, in California about quantification of insects declines or the advantages of native species for insects. A lot of it is, it's somewhere between anecdotal and formal studies, observational, a lot of observational studies, but very few experimental studies. But here is an insect, the meadow spittlebug, which I don't know about you, when I was a kid, I thought they were fascinating. They were pretty abundant when measured in 1988, but if you look at a number of places along the coast of California, you can see that they've dramatically declined continuously throughout the couple decades that passed since the first study was done. So I looked at the California Urban Forest Plan. I think it's I have the feeling it's been updated since 2014, but I couldn't find anything since then. And I think it's a pretty good forest plan. I've looked at quite a few forest plans. I think there's a lot of solid components. It covers multiple layers. It covers tree maintenance, which is huge. And it covers neighborhoods equitably, which is also really important. Of all the trees in San Francisco, there are roughly 670,000 and 105,000 street trees. The goal is to increase that in the next 15 or so years to 155,000. Of urban cities, San Francisco has the smallest urban canopy of any large city, but I feel like this is okay because San Francisco was not pre-colonially was not really a treed city. And there are some landmark trees considered in San Francisco, 7, but only 7 of those are native. So again, remember that historically San Francisco would have been wetlands, sand dunes, and scrub primarily, with some coastal oak woodlands. Really, I think what I found distressing was that the street tree list of acceptable street trees in San Francisco. I see there's a million questions in chat. I'm going to pause here after this slide and I'll get to those chat questions. So none of the commonly planted trees are native, and of the 628 trees that are planted, only 10% of them are native. And it seems that the Urban Forest Council and the California Native Plant Society are both pretty active in pushing for native species. I'm going to talk more about that, but I'm going to stop here for a second and look at the questions. Good heavens.
Kristina, Bob and I have been, as you talk about things, just pasting a ton of stuff into the chat. So
okay. Okay. So that's going. Okay. Otherwise, I'll be distracted.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Okay.
We can wait until the end for questions.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So, and I've run up against this in Chico. I don't know. I don't have an answer, but there's a lot of trees that I saw on the acceptable street tree list for San Francisco that, frankly, in my mind, are not acceptable for a lot of reasons. And one of them, one of my favorite plants to hate. Oh, I'm not there yet. I'll save my hated plant for a minute. I did notice this, though, that they do. There is a recommendation, and I've also noticed that. Shout out to the Yerba Buena chapter. They talk about recommended plants that are good native alternatives. And this Quercus agrifolia is something that I think really needs to be emphasized. Not only is a native tree, it hosts 41 lepidopteran species, and it says here, I don't know the source of this, 122 species that are likely. And then there's a few other ones, coffeeberry and toyon and California lilac are also important hosts for insects. Okay, here's the plant that I love to hate. And this is the London plane tree. This plant is not native, and I actually have been studying it for a number of years. And although there, as far as I know, are not any native Platanus racemosa species near these plantings, Platanus racemosa, or western sycamore, we found is predicted to go to extinct due to pollen pollution from the London plane tree. The London plane tree is a hybrid between Platanus occidentalis, the Eastern North America species, and Platanus orientalis, the Central Asian species. The London plane tree used to be called Acerifolia, the X meaning it's a hybrid, but we don't call it that anymore. Hispanica is the preferred name, so that's if we do talk about it. Why do we plant trees like this is what I'd like to know. I think this comes from, as lawns do, from the European and British aesthetic of what a garden should look like. I don't know about you, but this isn't really, I don't find this attractive, maybe because I'm a native plant botanist, but I think we can be a lot more creative with this. And as I said, I'm really not in favor of this tree being planted anywhere. And I'd like to see it taken off of your street tree list. The reason that it's preferred by urban foresters over the native is that, unlike the native, the hybrid grows a nice straight trunk, and it can be trimmed like this every year and provide for amount of shade. It's also very fast growing. Kind of good news if you want quick cover, bad news if you're worried about structural stability. The fast growth makes them very prone to branch fall in some areas. So this is our Western sycamore, and I don't have a good picture of the trunk. One thing that Western sycamore does that urban foresters don't like is that the trunk twists and turns a lot. The good news is, because of that, it also provides cavities. So when the trunk twists, it provides a cavity, and these are important nesting areas for birds and small mammals. And here is an example of a more mature one. This is the native range of Platanus racemosa. There's another subspecies that occurs out in Arizona called subspecies wrightii. But again, because of the extensive planting of Platanus hispanica, we are seeing genetic pollution in these plants, and will cause the eventual extinction of Platanus racemosa. So what do we do about that area around City Hall where all those Platanus hispanica have been planted? Well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a landscape architect. But this is San Francisco. I'm sure something non-traditional should be done, and something interesting in City Plaza. I think maybe it's a design contest among native plant aficionados or something. But wouldn't it be cool to see all those weirdly pruned trees replaced with some native biodiversity? Now, for street trees, I noticed that the #1 street tree is I'm sorry, I forget the name, but a couple of them are from Australia and New Zealand. So I have found that city foresters like trees that don't require a big planting box, which is a problem because a lot of our native trees require a big planting box. And they don't want trees that get really big because of the potential liability. So you may have noticed, I noticed it in San Francisco, I certainly noticed it in Chico, that there is a big push for dwarf versions. So native trees can be planted, but they're planted in dwarf versions, or they choose small trees that don't have any pests. Now, when you say no pests, you're also probably meaning no pollinators. These are things that evolved outside of this habitat, so they're being released from their pests and their pollinators when they're brought over. So why not, instead of a small Australian or New Zealand tree, plant something like Ceanothus thersiflorus, which can be pruned into a small tree and attracts hundreds of pollinators in some cases. Another example, a similar example, it can get very big, but it can also be pruned to size, and is the California buckeye. I'm curious, does the California buckeye go through summer senescence like it does in the valley? Does it lose its leaves in the summer?
Yeah,
it does.
When
Okay.
we had that terrible 2021 rain year where we got 8 inches of rain and our average should be 20 or 21 inches. It
Okay.
leaves really early and it didn't start to leaf out again until it got some rain.
In a normal year, though, would it do that?
Not as early. It's
Oh,
still
okay.
they've all the ones I've seen in San Francisco lose their leaves during the summer.
Okay. Okay. But then again, the summer's cloudy. It's not like you need the shade, right? In San Francisco. That's the one thing about San Francisco. It's so different. And then this beauty, another one. This one's actually evergreen. This is the silk tassel, and it flowers and puts out these gorgeous silk tassels in the winter at a time when other things aren't flowering. So it too can be pruned into a small tree, which is quite lovely. Hedges. Now, boxwood, of course, everywhere you go, there's boxwood. Why not coyote bush instead? These things, insects go crazy for coyote bush, and they can get huge, but they also can be, they stay really dense, and they can be heavily pruned, and they're really great for hosting insects. So there's a shout out for Baccharis pileularis. Similarly, manzanitas, this is densiflora, probably Howard McMinn, can be used as a hedge. They do grow up in the lower branches, thin out a little bit as they age, but again, they can be trimmed heavily into really whatever shape you want them. They're really nice that way. And this one, I have mixed feelings about this one, just because it's a hybrid, and I try to be a little more purist when it comes to planting native plants. But this one doesn't seem to lose any insect attractiveness due to its hybridity. And it is just stunning. I have one in my yard, and it literally, when it's a flower, stops traffic. People say, what is that? It's a deep, deep purple. So if you want a showstopper, this one is good, but again, it has to be carefully trimmed. But I would say that most of the non-native species also require this kind of heavy trimming in their establishment period also. So I wouldn't think that that's too much of a difference. Here's a buckeye that somebody let get really big, but provides a wonderful shade here in Willard and McAllister. Beautiful, beautiful plant.
And I'm gonna have
And
to interrupt you here to let you know that tree just got landmark status in San Francisco and is now protected.
yes, awesome. Oh, thank you so much for that wonderful information. That is a cool tree. I'm really glad. And I'm also glad to hear that it got landmark status. It's not a huge, I mean, it's broad, but it's not, when I think of landmark trees in Chico, they're like tall, and this one, that's wonderful news. Thank you. There are, again, wonderful educational sources, both from the city of San Francisco, and a lot of interactive maps at this length, and nature walks throughout the city. And of course, Yerba Buena chapter, you guys run your private garden tours, and look like there were some really wonderful opportunities there also. And so just get ideas from people who may have been doing this a little longer than you have to get started. Or maybe you've been doing it a long time and you want new ideas. And here is another one that provides wonderful winter color. This is Toyon heteromeles arbustifolia, another tree, small tree that can be nicely trimmed to fit a planter box, probably in the city. I don't know what size planter box, how big a one they might need, but not the huge ones that we need for some of the bigger trees. So this is Quercus agrifolia. This is a particularly large one. Most of the agrifolia that would have occurred in San Francisco was probably more of a Krummholz, meaning it was dwarfed by sand and wind and fog. But they're wonderful species. They host a lot of insects, and they're native to this area. So I'm a big proponent of agrifolia. Another plant that can be trimmed up just beautifully into tree is Cercis occidentalis, or the western redbud. One thing I've noticed, however, is to be very careful with nurseries, because a lot of times they're selling Cercis orientalis, the eastern redbud, not the same species. So do watch out for that. San Francisco is already doing wonderful habitat restoration whenever it seems like the opportunity permits. This is Heron's Head Park in the India Basin region near Pier 94 wetlands, both great projects. And apparently this has been used broadly for people, for school kids and just bird watchers. And it's a great example that of restoration success. So kudos for whoever's in charge of that. That was a really great project. And Christie Field, gosh, oh my gosh. I'm sure a lot of you can remember, as do I, Christie Field as something completely developed. Now, of course, it's a functioning estuary, and that's just a dream. It's wonderful. And with walkways and interpretive signage and bird habitat and the bridge, what a wonderful mix of the built environment and also the natural environment. So solutions, I have found that the biggest hurdle is really the Planning Commission, not because they don't want to help, because they don't know how to help. And I also found that developers are not really that fond of giving up even an inch of land for maybe a larger planter box or for a larger planting strip in a new suburb. But it does make these areas, I think, more desirable, and certainly provides more habitat. So this is something that I think we really, as a society, but particularly as native plant aficionados, we need to really work on educating city government about plant lists. We have a very strong native plant list on the Chico State campus now, and it almost doesn't matter. The developers come in with their plans that are developed out of the headquarters in Long Beach, and they want to plant big box store plants, and we say, no, you can't do that. It's very clear. We were very clear with the specs. So you just have to be very persistent and on the both landscaped architects, which I think is another area where we really need to increase native plant training, because urban foresters are either landscape architects or horticulturalists. They are not, as a rule, ecologists, and so they don't really have a sense of what's going on. Not that they don't want to know, they just haven't been trained in that area. I think similar to what we've done at Chico State campus is that it has to be mandated on new construction projects. I noticed there was a bond passed that provided a very large budget for the urban forest in San Francisco, but it didn't seem to be coupled with the native plant issue. And large planting basins, if you want an occasional, it doesn't have to be every planting basin, but a large tree here and there, they have to have large planting boxes. So that's something that is important. And In San Francisco, particularly, since it wasn't really a treed area, large native shrubs could be, or even small shrubs can be appropriate to different microclimates. And when trees need to be taken out, for whatever reason, don't replace them in kind with an Australian tree, replace them with a native shrub or tree. Make it a policy. And habitat islands are great, whether it's in a personal yard or whether it's a restaurant parklet, something like that. Those are other opportunities to create little bits of habitat. And provide incentives. I'm not entirely sure what those would be other than the aesthetics, but increase biodiversity in neighborhoods. So education, Yerba Buena chapter is doing a fabulous, in the city of San Francisco are doing a fabulous job about education. It seems every level. And it looks like San Francisco is creating native ecosystems for biological diversity. I know that in the financial district that there are rooftop gardens. Are these rooftop gardens planted with native plants? I don't know. And again, this is something that would have to be mandated because a commercial builder is just simply not going to have that in their line of vision. And one thing I have found also is that for something to be considered native for ratings of buildings, for environmental ratings like platinum and gold and silver and so on, the plants have to be sourced within 120 miles or native within 120 miles. This creates a problem for some towns. And I know that San Francisco has and is expanding their tree nursery. So really as a point of limiting what can be planted at large scale, that if the city is providing native trees at a large scale, it'll be easier to do that. We've already talked about using established ecological principles in an urban setting. And one thing I wasn't able to find a lot of evidence of in my poking around the San Francisco documents, maybe I'm wrong, please correct me if that's true, is measurable outcomes. What's the baseline and where are you trying to get and how are you going to measure that? One of my favorite projects is run out of Melbourne, Australia, in a place called Fisherman's Bend. And they have developed something called a biosensitive urban design. Melbourne, by the way, is a global leader in native plant revegetation. But the biosensitive urban design, or BSUD, draws on ecological theories and specifically protects existing habitat and creates new habitat, helps species disperse, whether we're talking about the endangered species that really are almost extirpated, if not already extirpated from from San Francisco, maybe reintroduce in some cases and help them disperse through these habitat connectivity. Try to minimize anthropogenic threats whenever possible, promote ecological processes like connectivity, and encourage positive human and nature interactions, like at Chrissy Field. It's just a beautiful example there. So in this study, they, and San Francisco, I think, has done this, collated spatial data, envisioning objectives, selecting target species, collating ecological knowledge, recommending biodiversity actions. And again, this is where I didn't see a lot of evidence, which was quantification of a baseline state and a biodiverse, the goal, and how, and did you get there, or are you on your way to getting there? And now, I feel a little sheepish about showing this picture because it's from Australia and it's exactly the wrong kind of tree. These are eucalyptus. But it illustrates the point. So here is the baseline scenario of this area, showing the new roads and parks in purple, and then the vegetation. The outcome was a little bit different. So they planted the native trees along the streets, and instead of providing more parks, there are parks here and more native trees planted along the streets. But even in small spaces, one important concept that is illustrated here is vertical space. So probably less important in San Francisco, but still to some extent, you want the higher stratum and then a mid stratum and then the understory. And so a canopy tree, maybe this is going to be an agrifolia, and then some large shrubs provide some habitat analogs for birds and insects, wetlands where appropriate, and understories of diverse native flowering plants, and a transport corridor for people to get through and still be part of this nature in the urban environment. For individual homes, similar concepts. In rural areas of California, this won't work so well because of the fire danger, which probably is also an issue in Australia, come to think of it. But this, again, we have the different layers, vertical layers, high, medium, and low, and green roofs, and a thoughtful creation of habitats. So again, just a little, even a patch of native habitat is important. And I want to point out this one little, I love cats, I really do, but if you have an outdoor cat, please reconsider making it an indoor cat. One of the greatest threats to native biological diversity globally, and responsible for the extinction of many species in places like Hawaii, are introduced small mammals like cats. Cats are just brutal on the environment, and for the safety of your cat too, you might want to consider keeping it indoors just because of the urban threats to the cat. So practical solutions, basically you're making organisms, making it easier for them to go from one place to another, and planning needs to happen at very local scales, medium scales, and at the regional level, at the city level. The state of California has habitat conservation plans that go across counties. I don't know if San Francisco probably has its own just because it's a little different. And focus on hosting endangered species, whether they be plant species. San Francisco has a number of endangered insect species. Focus on host plants for those insect species. And for smaller species like the endangered frog, facilitate dispersal across major barriers. It's not something that's going to obviously do very well in the dense avenues, but in areas where there are more wetlands available, there will be opportunities to facilitate dispersal. And what we just need to remember is that our natural community was there first, and then we build the urban design within that natural community. And though we've, in most cases, obliterated the natural community, it's not too late to go back and rethink that and restore the native community around where we built. And again, estuaries and ephemeral and permanent waterways are critically important, especially in a place like San Francisco. And another thing is native biodiversity can be used to define the neighborhoods. Out in the Richmond, you can, if it was sand dunes, plant sand dune species. If the soil still allow that, actually. If it was native Quercus agrifolia in that neighborhood. I think that would be probably Laurel Heights now. Plant, make it all oak woodlands and define the city neighborhoods using those different habitats. This is just, I pulled this, Susan Karasoff has these fabulous, again, I'm not sure why you guys need me here, because everything I've said is in all these talks that Susan put together for the San Francisco Public Library. They're fabulous. I would, and they're not as long-winded as I am in most cases. So I would take full advantage of these wonderful seminars. And I will just end here with a wonderful picture of some native plants out at Baker Beach at the Presidio, which is another wonderful series of examples of native habitat restoration. And thank you. And I see there are 37 things in chat. Eesh. Should I go to chat or not? Or should I just?
Are you ready?
Done.
Start
I'm done.
Questions?
Yeah, questions.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions.
Okay.
So we had a really great question about when we plant native plants in cities, we sort of bring in that urban wildlife interface. How is that going to affect fire? I apologize if Lawrence.
I think I kind of get it. Well, you know, San Francisco, I mean, I think in a place like San Francisco that's already so densely developed that it's going to be less of an issue. I mean, if a fire, as we all know from 1906, that if a fire is going to come, and it's going to come, and I don't think native plants in that particular scenario are going to make a difference, because we're talking about concrete and native plants, concrete native plant versus somewhere like in a more rural county like Butte County, like Paradise, for example. Of course, it was all really dense vegetation. It was not a dense urban. It was a suburb really of Chico with lots of vegetation. But we do have to plan for fire. And I think, again, whether it's native or non-native, unless you have no plants, it's gonna burn. Did that answer the question? Okay, should I go to chat, or I see more things popping up here? Fire management talk. Okay, I will. Yeah, okay, that one's answered. Looks like most of those have been answered by Bob and Susan. Oh, cool. Nice. I was just reading a comment. Okay, it's going to be too distracting, I think, for me to go all through these questions. If you have a question that's in the chat, could you just please ask it? Raise your hand.
Yes, please raise your hand, because this is a webinar, so it's harder for me to figure out who you are.
Oh, I like this point about maintenance is important. Again, and cities have to maintain, whether it's native or non-native, they have to be maintained.
And Susan Mulaney, if you would send your question to all, that would be great. Please repost. And we do have a fire management talk on June 9th. That's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I would look forward to that.
Yeah. And we had a question about a 5% rule on the same species in a city's tree canopy, and whether or not that was to prevent disease outbreak. And I was looking for the reference because I've definitely seen it, and I thought it was a 5% for species. It's almost certainly wrong. 10% for genus, and it's either 15 or 20% for family.
Yeah. So, and you're absolutely right. That's a good point that I didn't mention. Yeah, you wouldn't. So you have Quercus agrifolia and Chrysolepis that are native to the city. Lobata probably did not occur in the city, right? The soils weren't good enough. Yeah, one would have to be careful with that. But you're absolutely right that can be a problem. But in the riparian areas, there are a few riparian areas. Those almost, I mean, they would have been wetlands, but it seems to me that even in San Francisco, there would have been trees in some of those riparian areas, like Plantinus racemosa or alders, some of the things that one normally expects in the valley.
Yeah,
Why?
a bunch of willows, and we've got
Yeah, right.
incredible at supporting
Mm-hmm.
Wildlife. So not only, so for it's willows, oaks, and cherries are the top 3 species, or the top 3 genus for every county in the United States, according to Talamy. He's got all of that data collected on the National Wildlife Federation database. And but for us, it's willows first, and those are only riparian.
Okay, yeah, and you have your choice of a fair. Lesiolepis was probably the one that grew here, but
yeah, we've got or 5
yeah.
or something. We've got a bunch of different willows depending on exactly what size you want, and they're all great. I think the most drought tolerant one is the arroyo willow that goes all the way down past Los Angeles, and it can take a drier summer than the rest of them can. And I've got that one in my backyard.
Cool.
Yeah, it's great.
Oh, it's good to hear that the Mike Wood's book. That's great.
Oh, it's so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately for San Francisco, we have 125,000 street trees, and less than 1%, actually around a half of 1% are native trees.
Yeah, this is where you really have to get some, I mean, and that's simply not going to change unless they're forced to do it. I have found it has to be mandated.
We're still trying. There's still 2 trees on the approved street tree list that are on the California Invasive Plant Council list.
Oh dear.
I know.
Yeah, and you got to get rid of the acerifolia. I tell you, I'm on a campaign to get rid of those.
Oh yeah, and
good luck. Everybody's urban foresters love them.
Yeah, every WCALS medium tree, the water use classificational landscape system. So we've got a Acer, the Acer rubra. The red maple is a WCALS medium tree. If you're going to put a WCALS medium tree and put in our native hazelnut, it's WCALS. Actually, it's WCALS low, but honestly, it needs some water. I've got 4 of them. They're adorable.
No, I don't tell anybody, but I have a couple of non-natives in my yard too that I just don't have the heart to get rid of. They were there when I moved in. I'm saying that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and we've got a question on household turf alternatives from Catherine. So if you wouldn't mind going to the CNPS Sierra Buena website and looking for our landscape use, the biodiversity resources, we've got a landscape use list, and it's got a very long list of household turf alternatives that are all drought tolerant. They're native. Some of them are stand specific.
Cool.
We've got 6 different kinds of soil in San Francisco. We've got a turf alternative for every single one of them, and sun and shade and fog. It's fun. Oh, Lawrence had another comment about fire. Fires are worse at the urban wildlife interface, and we're creating non-irrigated wildland in an urban setting. Good.
Yeah. I mean, but you already have that basically, is what I would argue, and that's not going to change. If San Francisco were, I mean, surrounded by or like I said, like paradise, it would be a concern, but San Francisco's not like paradise. And if San Francisco catches fire, we're all done. I mean, and I don't think native plants are going to change that outcome. I really don't. Just because you already, for the green areas, you already have greenery, and for the street trees, you already have a tree there. Why not make it native instead of Australian? Does that answer your question?
And I mean, honestly, the Australian, the eucalyptus here are so drought stressed that they're an enormous fire risk for us. And we are 16% eucalyptus in San Francisco for our canopy. It's appalling.
Wow.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah. Now, my sister is a historical landscape person, and we argue about, because these historical eucalyptus stands, I know there are a couple at the Presidio, and there's one down in the peninsula somewhere. And I say, take them out. And they say, no, they're historically significant and they're important. And as long as they keep them from invading, okay, but
It's interesting to walk in the Presidio, and there's one side that is newly restored natives of this path, and the other side of the path is eucalyptus. And Bob Hall, I can't remember what the name of that newly restored native section is of the Presidio, but on one side with all the natives, you've got birds and insects and butterflies and bees, and it's just this zombie death patch with the eucalyptus. There's just nothing living there. It's awful.
Yeah, that's the Tennessee Valley watershed. It extends from Julius Kahn Playground all the way down to the bay. It's pretty amazing. It's a great place to walk, and you can hear chorus frogs there at night. It's pretty crazy to hear them in the city, and great. I love it. Also, the ukes in the city, the plantations are reaching, how do you say that word? Senescence. They're reaching the end of their life. So, and they're really taking it hard from the drought. And the Presidio has a mandate to plant cultural plants to honor the military that was there. So, but they're not planting back the eucalyptus globus. They're planting the silver dollar eucalyptus back. And now they're trying to mix in some natives in the understory of those. So it's going to take some time to get them to realize that, hey, there were some indigenous people there before the military got there.
Yeah,
and they weren't easy. Go ahead.
No, it's just it seems like a weird thing to me. But yeah, and I like the idea that that they're planting native plants in the understory. It's a complete myth that eucalyptus is allelopathic. It's actually very water competitive, and which is why other plants have a hard. So if you plant drought tolerant things underneath it, it shouldn't be an issue. But that's going to take some experimentation.
Oh, that's good to know, because I've been repeating that myth. So
yeah, some professors at San Luis Obispo have done some experimentation. It's pretty clear. And yeah, I think it's just because eucalyptus is so fast growing and such a water user that it prevents everything else from growing.
And there's no cavities in it for the birds, so it's crazy. It's just so worthless.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like is that about it? It's like we've exhausted most of the questions.
Ooh, Lawrence Abbott has a really interesting comment at the very bottom.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Wow, Really interesting.
Yeah, because they're they're not native. That's why they don't have native insects.
No insects, no way to get rid of all that fuel load.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. Yeah, we've had a very interesting things going on in the chat. Lawrence has got a really good question. How can he start a resolution in Lathrop, California to install more native plants?
Get on the whatever for Lathrop, California, get on whatever committee makes that decision. There's probably an urban forester, and if there's not, there's certainly a planning commission or a some kind of commission that reviews plans and development. So I would say go there first, and then just sit in on the meetings and comment on the council meetings, or when there's a new development, or write letters. But for me, it was getting it whenever something about the urban forest came up in Chico. I would just go to the meetings and comment repeatedly until they got sick of me.
Yeah, another way to do it too is to stay abreast of everything, is to join your CNPS Conservation Committee or the Golden Gate Audubon chapter here as the Audubon local chapter, but you probably have a local chapter in your area too that are active and looking at what's going on with the city and following development and landscaping projects. So and you can't do it alone. It's too much for one person to monitor. So you need to really take it on as a team. And Susan and I and many of our board members have been monitoring meetings and even befriending some of the developers. And sometimes they want to help out a bit if they can. And it helps to meet with them as often as you can. You have to go to the pre-meetings, and you have to comment on the environmental impact reports. Then you have to talk to your city supervisors, and I mean it's a whole lot of work and a lot of networking. It's not going to happen with just one or two comments. You have to do a full court press.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm probably gonna. I think I'm leaving the chat. I saved it. So unless there are any pressing questions, it's early morning here, so I think I'm gonna go to bed.
It's very early for you. Kristina, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And
thank you for all your work.
And I just heard from people in the chat that they're unable to save it.
I saved it.
Yeah, I've got it saved too. Okay. So if whoever needs a copy of the chat, because there was so much information in it, if you could send an email to the CNPS Sierra Buena, and we'll get that to you. Okay. Oh, Bob Hall's got the dots. Yay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Keep up the good work. Go CNPS.
Thank you, Kristina.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, good night. All right. Good night, everyone.